that kind of gives you guys a good idea of kind of the philosophical differences that we're dealing with in classical education as opposed to more contemporary modern education. Some of you guys might already be familiar with some of that. I know there are quite a few here that have done either classical conversations or are just familiar with classical education in general. But that kind of gives you guys a good idea of, one, the organization that we are going to be a part of. We are currently registered with ACCS as a startup school. ACCS is one of the first organizations in classical education as far as in-person classical. That was started in Moscow, Idaho by Douglas Wilson and his kind of area up there. They formed ACCS as just a way to handle all of the interest after he published the book, Recovering the Lost Tools of Learning, which there's a copy of it out there. If there's a single book that I could recommend to anybody interested in classical education, it would be Recovering the Lost Tools of Learning. It is really what kicked off the whole movement. There were schools forming around the same time using similar methods, but that really brought it into mainstream. So I would highly recommend that. But what we'll go through real quick is just a couple of the handouts that I had. If you guys didn't grab one, there's some more out there. But this first one, this 2-pager with a staple in it, this is just a draft version of something that we would likely give prospective parents if they were to come to the school. This is not final in any capacity. This is just kind of an example. This is largely copied from Grace Classical Academy in Springfield, which Rob and I visited a few months ago. It was probably mid last year sometime, last school year. But they were gracious enough to have us come visit and talk with the headmaster there and walk around the school and see what it was like there. They've been there 20 years, and they've seemed to have had a wonderful, they're really doing well. I think they have around 200 students or so right now. I said 260. 260? Okay. So a good number of students there. One thing that if we end up watching it, we might not just because of time constraints, but I'll share what the other video is. It talks about numerous schools that started with 9 students, 8 students, and now 5 to 10 years later they have 200. So it really doesn't matter how few or how many we have whenever we start. We can start with however many the Lord provides to us. If it's 8, praise the Lord. If it's 50, praise the Lord. 50 seems like a lot to start with, but it's up to him. So, but this is just kind of a general draft of what we might give a parent. There is one point on here that Grace does that for us starting probably won't be applicable right to start, but maybe down the road it would be, and that is number 4. It talks about how they do not accept high school age students coming from outside of the classical method unless the student is the one wanting to come to their school. So that's something Grace does in Springfield because they found students forced into it at a high school age, it does not work, and it causes more problems for the student, the parents, and the school than are worth it. But for us, starting, I don't know that would be something that we'd want to enforce right away. That would be something probably closer to start date once we have a school board formed, making that decision final. But in my mind, in the future, that does seem like a good principle, especially kids coming from public school into classical against their will. That's going to be a big challenge. It's not impossible, but something to consider. So that's a point on this draft that just consider as probably not right away, but maybe down the road that's going to be a philosophy of the school. But that kind of gives you a general outline of what we might present to a parent. It also has on there, on the 3rd page, a great list of suggested reading. Those of you familiar with classical, a lot of those titles are going to look very familiar. Someone like me, coming from outside of it, into it, learning it, it was all new. Now, anyone that knows me, knows I'm a big Douglas Wilson fan. So seeing his name on here a lot, this was Grace's reading list. I was like, oh, interesting. But it's because he was instrumental in starting the movement. But there's a number of books on here that are really good, even outside of just his stuff, but his stuff is a good encapsulation of a lot of it. He's done a good job of consolidating a lot of the philosophies in classical education into a couple of books. I would say Recovering the Lost Tools, Case for Classical Christian Education is also very good. And then there's a number of other ones on there. Excused Absence and Battle for the American Mind are good ones for if any of you know people that are coming from a public school background that are interested in this. Those are going to be two books that I would highly recommend. If you had a public school education and you don't know what classical is, I would also highly recommend that, because what we're dealing with here is not just, okay, it's kind of like they said in the video, we're not just taking the secular format and putting Bible on top. It's an entire reworking of how we think about what education is from the foundation up. It's not public school method with Bible. It's entirely different. So for those of us starting this, raise your hand if you had a classical education growing up. One. Yeah. So a lot of us don't. So for a lot of us, it's going to be hard to wrap our minds around probably initially the paradigm shift that we have to go through in order to think differently about how we're going to educate the students at our school. For some of us, probably won't be as much of a challenge if we're already open to it. But those two books, Battle for the American Mind and Excused Absence, are really good at articulating problems with public school and why classical is different. So that, and then there's also a good description of what the trivium is. And that is central to a lot of what classical education is. It's ancient. The idea of the trivium has been around for centuries. And Dorothy Sayers kind of put the trivium together with classical, the idea of Christian education and the age groups. She divided age groups into the trivium, basically. So the grammar stage is the first 4 years of schooling, roughly. Some schools do it various amounts of time. But grammar stage is the youngest age, learning lots of facts, lots of information, because that is what their brain is geared to doing, just downloading information, just learning everything, chance, memorization. The kindergartners at the school that Rob and I visited all had Psalm 100 memorized and recited it for us, and we were pretty blown away by that. And then he said,
no hesitation.
No hesitation. They also were signing it, which was cool.
Better than many adults have.
I don't have it memorized, so yeah. They signed it as well, so that's a big thing that they were doing up there. Is they used sign language to learn, which was impressive. I believe they said the 6th graders had the entire book of James memorized, which was also very impressive. So grammar stage is a lot of memorization, a lot of facts. It's laying the foundation of information. And then you move into the logic or dialectical stage, and this is where the why is introduced. They talked a lot about in the video the why of everything. That is central. The why of science, like why does the Earth rotate around the sun, and that leads us to the biblical foundations. We always get to point back to, this is what the Word of God says. This is what Scripture says. This is truth with a capital T. This is actual truth. We can always use that as, that is in everything that we will do in the school. Is Bible is throughout. It's not segregated into its own class. It is integrated into everything, and the subjects are integrated into one another. History and literature are blended together very thoroughly in classical education, because you're learning about history through some of the most important writings throughout history.
And art and music.
And art and music, yes.
Everything, economy.
Yeah.
Politics, everything.
Yes. Yeah, it's all integrated together. It's not siloed, because nothing is siloed like that in life. The last stage, rhetoric stage, is the last 4 years of schooling. That's where they're learning to articulate all of the things that they've been learning, all of the ideas. They're learning to express themselves, not in the worldly way of expressing but actually truly expressing themselves intellectually, thoughtfully, not just these are the clothes I wear, this is who I am, which we'll get to in talking about uniforms. But expressing yourself deeply and with the biblical foundation. So that's that document. We'll very quickly go through this other one. I won't go through every bit of information on the differences. This is something that is good to have in mind for people that you might know or yourself if, some people might be going to, like, let's say College Heights, or I know there's another school that opened or just down the road here in Duquesne. It's not classical in method. I'm sure both of those schools are very well intentioned, but they are coming from a place of not understanding what has happened to secular education and how corrupt it actually was since 1850s. And so they're just going, oh, we don't like how public education has gone. Let's just do that, but actually not take God out of it without entirely removing the waste that was put on top of education by the secular establishment. Again, Battle for the American Mind, so good. It enraged me, but it was very, very good. So we'll just really quickly go through a couple of these things. So the main one that I should have moved up to number one, this is from the ACCS website, is Bible class versus Bible integration, which is what we were talking about. Instead of a Bible class, Bible is integrated into every subject. It is throughout everything that we would do at our school. It's not just its own thing. When we're talking about history, when we're talking about science, it's all integrated into it because God is the creator of all of those subjects, and he has revealed himself through his word. So in order to really truly understand those subjects, we need to understand what he has revealed about himself in the word. So Bible integration is going to be a key, and I think, Rob, we saw a lot of that whenever we were up there in Springfield. It was throughout, it was in everything that they did. There was no, okay, we're going to Bible class. There is a Bible class, but it bled into everything that they did. There's a lot on here. Latin and Greek is a big one versus the modern languages like Spanish or French or Chinese. Latin is a staple of classical education, and the benefits of Latin, teaching Latin to kids, is pretty unreal in terms of statistics. And it helps with comprehension of English. It helps with comprehension of other languages. They told us at Grace that their kids can understand other languages that they've never had a single lesson in because they know Latin. They'll hear French or Spanish or whatever and understand what's being said without having lessons because of the foundation of Latin. So much comes from Latin that it helps throughout. It helps through comprehension of everything, not just in English and literature, but it helps throughout. And some of you that have done classical know the benefits even better than I do about what Latin can bring.
Latin is a real mental workout.
Yeah.
It is a mental workout. And when kids start young, they learn English very well because they learn sentence structure.
Yeah.
And the benefits are just like you said.
Yeah.
Vocabulary, and think about your vocabulary in science. So all these Latin words.
Mm-hmm.
If you know the roots, you're going to be able to
Yeah.
at least guess what the meaning is.
Yes. Yeah, on Canon Plus, they have, it's called the Kraken Latin. It's their, Kraken Latin curriculum, I guess, for the school year. It's like video series teaching Latin, and my wife and I just started watching one. We were like, all right, let's start with this. And immediately it was so clear, so much can be drawn out of this. They were talking about...
The neat thing is that you go from the grammar stage, so kids are great about wanting to just, seeing those,
Uh-huh.
the endings.
Mhm.
And they don't even know what they're talking about. They don't know what they're doing. They don't know why they're doing it. But then later on, you build on all of that.
Yeah.
And you learn how to apply it. So it works great with the trivia.
Right. Yes, exactly.
I know they were, taking Latin from English to Latin in their sophomore year.
Mhm.
Read Cicero and completely change it from Latin to English.
Yeah. Yeah,
They
and
get really good at it.
and I know at Grace they started doing Latin, I believe, in 3rd grade. That's the age group that they start with Latin with their students. I know there's variation on different classical schools of when they start that, and in homeschool it might vary as well. But other things on this, I won't go into all of these details right now, but this is a good illustration of the differences between just contemporary education and classical Christian education. I'm not going to go through every point because I want to be able to get to your guys' questions and whatnot. But a couple of resources before we get to questions. So this is the ACCS website. There's a lot of stuff on here that is great. There's a ton of information. We also now, as a member school, have access to what is called the member database. And there are curriculums that have been shared on there. There's access to people applying for jobs, people that have been educated in the classical Christian world. A lot of them really want to teach in classical Christian education, and there's job postings. So whenever we get to the point where we're hiring teachers, there's a good resource on there for us for people that have been classically educated. I'm not saying that every single one of our teachers has to have that, because especially starting, we're probably not going to be able to do that. But having some at some point down the road is going to be critical. But there's a lot of resources on here. Like I said, this is the website version of the 10 reasons. This page right here, and there's more information under each one of these little blurbs. But one thing I wanted to look at, just some of you guys might be very convinced by statistics. They were compelling to me as I was looking at the benefits of classical education. It's pretty unreal, the difference in test scores, in just general success rate in life of classically educated students. I mean, the blue on all of here is ACCS, and you can just see, so ACT scores as class of 2019 are pretty head and shoulders above everything else. There's a chart in, I believe, a book out there that had biblical worldview test and how well a student's biblical worldview remains intact throughout their education based on the type of education that they got. And the only one that maintained or was very close to maintaining their biblical worldview was classical education. And that could be the homeschool version or in person, but it's generally classical Christian was the only one that was successful at really maintaining. Everybody else gets into the high school age and it just goes down. And like they said in the video, many Christian students that don't go through something like this, that go through public education, get to college, and that's when they go apostate. They don't go to church anymore because they haven't really been prepared to. They haven't really been prepared to encounter the world and its view. And classical really does. I remember Doug talking about how their school in Moscow was the only one that taught both evolution and creation to their students at the high school age, and brought in a college professor, an evolutionary college professor, and the students in the class debated the college professor. And I don't know what college professor is going to put himself through that to go to a room of Christian students and just like be berated. But they would bring in a atheistic evolutionary teacher, and the students would go up against that teacher and debate, not in an argumentative way, but in a way that classical equips them to. So you're going to have students going into college prepared for fighting with their college professor. It's not going to be perfect. There will always be times where kids, it does not, by the sovereignty of God, sometimes they don't stay with it. But regardless, they will be equipped for life. They're going to be a better, well-rounded individual. Even if they don't remain in the faith, they're going to be a better person just functionally out in the world. Now, we would always pray and hope that they would remain in the faith, but that is up to the Lord. So on here, this kind of speaks to that. Not that a college education is the end-all, be-all, but 88% of classical Christian alumni receive a BA or higher in college. 73% felt well prepared for a job. 55 earned all or mostly A's in college. 70% read the Bible regularly. 88% attend church 3 times per month. So there's verses at the bottom of just Christian and standard homeschool. I don't think these numbers underneath count classical conversations because it's the same methodology. But that's versus like 65% of Christian school and homeschool alumni attend church 3 times a month. 55 regularly read the Bible. So even amongst just Christian education, classical Christian is much more successful at this. Like I said, the statistics are compelling to me. They might not be to everybody, but we have some empirical evidence outside of just the methodology and the philosophical talk of what classical can do. There's some hard data there. This on here is a more in-depth description of the trivium. I would just generally recommend this website. There's so much information. It's classicalchristian.org. We'll put the link on the video, so once the video goes out, you can see that, and we'll also link the documentary. So that's a big part, and then this last section is just more information, more data on the success of classical Christian education. Not going to go into all of that, but you can see there's a lot of these resources. They've done a lot of study on this stuff to see the benefits. And one thing I wanted to say, and then we'll get into questions. One question is going to probably be accreditation. And the thing that I have found talking to Jedediah in Springfield, that's the headmaster up there, is that accreditation for ACCS, it has largely been unnecessary for them. They are not accredited in Springfield. They are just a member of ACCS. Accreditation is largely for the purpose of their students being able to get into college, right? But they have found it's kind of been unnecessary because the education is so rigorous at Grace. Colleges see low grades or medium grades in the school, and then super high ACT and SAT scores. And colleges are going, oh, the education they're getting is rigorous. They're a very intelligent student. They can come to our school. They have had one instance over the 20 years where them not being accredited caused a problem, and it wasn't a big Ivy League university, a super liberal college. It was a local community college where an admissions person there had beef with classical Christian education and wouldn't let them in. Jedediah called the headmaster and they got it sorted out. The kid got into the school. So over 20 years, only one time has it ever been an issue. So for us, I don't think we will get accredited, at the very least not right away. It's going to be largely unnecessary, I think, as long as we continue to do it well. So questions. I'm going to go through just a handful of these general questions that the steering committee and I kind of came up with. A lot of these are mostly Alex, so thank you, Alex, for coming up with a lot of these example questions. But keep in mind, these answers are guesses, and based on, this is kind of what we're thinking and what we're striving for. They're not going to be concrete. Will the school wear uniforms? Yes, we will be a uniform school. This is largely because of what I was talking about earlier about the expressing oneself. Classical schools have really found that clothing, hairstyles, all of that stuff can just be a distraction. It can divide students amongst themselves. They're putting on an identity with their own choice of clothes, all of that stuff, as opposed to it kind of formulates finding your identity in something other than what you're feeling and what you're wanting to wear and all of that stuff. So that's the reason why a lot of classical schools do uniforms, is because one, it creates a sense of unity amongst the school. There's not as much division of like, oh, that kid wears those kind of clothes, we wear these kind of clothes. It just helps eliminate that. There's probably going to be some, ruffling of feathers with kids that are not used to wearing a uniform, but they have found over time at Grace the kids love it. They don't have to think about what they're going to wear in the morning. They're putting on their uniform and they're going to school. It's not as big of a deal for them once they get used to it. So yes, it will be a uniform school. What is the cost of tuition? Estimated between $4,000 and $5,000 a year. That is, I believe, $2,000 less than College Heights is right now. I think College Heights is over $6,000. A lot of private classical Christian schools are around $6,000, but that's just not a price that I think we will need to charge right away. Over time, there will probably be an increase just given the cost of things. But one philosophy that I know Doug's school in Moscow has is never turning any student away because of finances. And I really would love us to have that mentality as well. I don't know what the answer to that is always, but it's something for us to really keep in mind as a philosophy. We don't want to turn away a student because their family can't afford the education. We would want to try and work with them as much as possible. That might look like extra fundraising. It might look like somebody sponsoring a student. It might look like keeping a handful of our teachers as volunteer. Like, hey, this person just volunteers to teach one class a week or something in order to save on cost for educators. So I don't know what the answer to that is, but that's kind of the philosophy. But
Does that include books and uniforms and?
Likely books and uniforms would be, I believe books are on top of that. That would just be tuition. Books and uniforms would be a charge on top of the base tuition. My hope in my early calculations has been around 4 to 4.5 for just the tuition. So keeping it under 5 with all of that stuff is the goal. I really don't want to go over 5 our first year. I think that would kind of be too high for especially a school with potentially 10 students to charge 5 a year. But along those lines, discounted tuition for multiple students, we would definitely want to do that. Most schools do about 10% per student in the same family. Most of them top out at 4, so kids number 4 and beyond would be probably at the same price, but that's going to be 40% off the regular tuition price. Any questions about tuition stuff, financial stuff right away? Okay, we'll keep going, and then if something comes up, we'll come back to it. What subjects will be taught that aren't seen in public schools or private schools? We talked a little bit about some of that, but Latin, etiquette, theology, music and art appreciation, integrated history and literature, integrated history and everything. Personal finance is one that I saw Grace does. Discipleship, logic, rhetoric, and apologetics. I'm going to bring up here, that's just our poster. You guys don't need to see that. So you might not be able to see this in super big detail, but this is the schedule for 7th through 12th grade at Grace in Springfield. I know there's a lot of colors on this page, but you can just see some of the titles. You've got general science, Missouri history, there's a Reformation history. Oh, excuse me. There's Reformation history, which I currently want to take myself. American and modern history. There's medieval history. There's physics, different types of Bible survey, discipleship. So you can see there's a lot of different classes on there that you would not see in a typical school setting. Logic, rhetoric, and then you might see on here that the 12th graders at Grace don't go to school in the afternoons. That's one thing that we're kind of talking about, how we want to handle the schedule. So Grace in Springfield does 4 days a week. They don't do school on Monday because they want Sunday to be Sunday for their students and their families. But if our goal is to have a full-time school for parents that work 5 days a week, that's not really going to be an option. That might look something like Monday is a study day. They come in, they don't have explicit classes where they're doing something, but they're coming in and able to work on their homework from the weekend. But one thing they do for their older kids is they can get a part-time job if they want. They can, if they don't have Mondays off and they have all their afternoons off, their 12th graders can go and get a part-time job and earn some money before going to college. So that might be something that we think about as we go. Yes, what's up?
So if you go with the accreditation,
Uh-huh.
then is this a set schedule you have to follow, and is the curriculum that you have to follow?
No, I don't believe so. From what I understand in ACCS, there's multiple curriculums that you can kind of build from. I don't think accreditation necessarily restricts that. I think they probably just verify that you're doing something within kind of the broader classical method, if that makes sense. Like, so like this set schedule, because Grace isn't accredited, this is not like hard and fast. This is not necessarily exactly what ours would have to look like or anything like that. And also keep in mind, this is a school that's been going for 20 years. They're going to have probably some more than we'll initially have, but this is just kind of something to strive for. But no, I don't think it's a rigid, this is what your schedule has to be, this is what, this is the only curriculum you can use. There's tons of resources on the site where schools will just post, hey, this is our curriculum, and have it as a resource for other schools that are starting up. And a lot of those look similar, but have various books plugged in and pulled out and changed. But yeah.
Will you follow the 12 students for one tutor? Or
We do want to keep classes as small as possible. I don't know what do you remember what Grace said of their class size?
It's not more than 20. I'm thinking that first kindergarten class had,
Maybe 15.
yeah, probably about 15.
Yeah. I didn't have a specific number in mind, but I think keeping it as limited as possible is going to be the best method, especially early. We might have classes where it's 3 grades together and it's only 5 students. And, you know, a teacher can spend more time with each of those individual students if they only got the 5 and give them some specialized instruction based on their age. But I would say yes, probably 12 to 15 would be around where we would want to keep it. I wouldn't even really want to get up to 20. So 15 would probably be the highest number. So that's that age group. We'll look real quickly at, this is just what a first grade kind of schedule looks like. They stay with one teacher at Grace up there. Again, this is going to look different for us, but this is just kind of an example for the future. This is much more standard in terms of what we might be all used to, but the difference will obviously be the content of what is being talked about in these classes. So that's that. And then the 6th grade I have on here as well, but that also looks pretty similar to a more straightforward class, but you've got individual reading, chapel, Bible, you've got art, which, you know, art appreciation is not something I remember taking in 6th grade in public school. Like, if there was one, it was an elective. You didn't have to take it. But things like that are going to be much more integrated into the entire curriculum. It's not like you get a choice to take art appreciation or music appreciation. You're going to take one of those. Okay, so let's keep going through the questions real quick because I want to have it open for you guys. Extracurriculars, in terms of sports, eventually, yes, we will want to offer some type of sports. Athletics, I think, are beneficial, but when we start, it's not going to be an option. Okay, Alex was making some gesture at me. But we want to do some type of sports and athletics eventually. But initially it would probably extracurriculars would look more like chess club or what were some of the examples I had on videography, cooking, astronomy, that kind of stuff would probably be more of our extracurriculars to start, but we do want to work towards having sports eventually and athletics. One thing that I think would be great is house competition. Yes, like Harry Potter, but really more like old school, boarding school house competition. That's what Grace does in Springfield, and they've said it's been great for camaraderie amongst their students, healthy competition, not vicious competition, you know, taught in a Christian way, that kind of competition. But So that would be something that would look like. All of their 4 houses were all named after different reformers, which I thought was pretty cool. So we might do something like that. Disciplinary system. This is something where I'm currently getting into what a in-person disciplinary system might look like for a classical school. Matthew 18 is going to be a foundation because that's how you handle conflicts. We're going to try and base everything we do off of Scripture. So Matthew 18 is going to be an integral part of that. But this is an area where I'm still delving into what discipline might look like in a classical school. I've gone through a lot of the philosophy stuff and like why do a classical school. Now I'm getting into more of the hard nuts and bolts of this is what it might look like day to day. So that's something that will be fleshed out a little bit more as we go. Level of independence from regulation, state and federal. I want it to be entirely independent of governmental regulations as much as humanly possible. I don't believe most ACCS schools have any kind of governmental funding coming in like that. ACCS doesn't really have a ton of oversight in terms of control over their member schools. They are much more there as a support and a resource than like an overseeing governing body. So a lot of our regulation in terms of what we do will be from our school board that forms. I don't know what that looks like explicitly, but in principle, I do not want to be taking any kind of government money because there are almost always strings attached to that. That might even mean not accepting vouchers. That I need to do more research on what vouchers look like in the state of Missouri specifically. It is getting to a point where there might even be strings attached to a voucher system or some type of tax credit. So likely we might not accept that, but again, philosophy of not wanting to turn away because of finances, we try and find a work around that. What will the earliest education year be offered? That will largely depend on the students that come to us our first year. But down the road, I think kindergarten would probably be what we would start with. Pre-K, I know Jedediah talked to us and he really encouraged their parents not to send their kids to pre-K. Keep that extra year at home with your kids. They don't need to come to pre-K. That is definitely a secular mindset of get them into school as quickly and early as possible. So while we might end up offering something like pre-K maybe down the road, it was definitely not something that was on our priority list at all.
There's a really wonderful classical curriculum for at-home preschool.
Okay.
It just kind of helps. It's classical, but it's also kind of got the Montessori feel to it.
Uh-huh.
I really love, and it helps the parent just to know what to talk about today, what nature walks to take,
Right.
how to, gives them ideas. So if anybody needs a
Yeah.
classical, and it's getting them ready for classical conversation.
Yeah.
So it's called Scribblers.
Okay, that might be something good for us to provide whenever we get to that question where they're like, hey, here, what do we do for pre-K? Here you go. Instead of, the one thing Jedediah said is pre-K can be a moneymaker, but don't let that suck you into it just to make money. Okay, will elementary age students move from class to class, teacher to teacher, or stay in one room? The goal would be to keep them with one teacher. I don't really want elementary switching between a ton of teachers. Young kids need consistency. They'll start switching between teachers when they get older. There might be specialized classes where someone might come in for Latin or something, I don't know, or music, yeah. Where will classes...
Why are we doing that? I mean, why would they switch? Why wouldn't they continue with their one tutor?
Into high school?
Yeah.
I think because the idea that the I think some of it is that the size of school they might need to switch and specialization, like if teachers have an emphasis in something, like a history teacher or something like that. That's just what I've seen from in-person ACCS schools, is that they go into a switching between teachers system when it comes to 7th grade.
Eventually, you might want to consider a tutor that's been classically educated, that is well-rounded in all the subjects.
Yeah.
That kind of goes against the classical model by having a specialist in this area.
Okay.
Where we're trying to promote the whole student, the whole human
Yeah.
who knows how to do math and knows how to do.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
That's a little bit different for me, but
Okay.
I'm not trying to argue with you.
No, yeah, no, that's good, and that's good stuff to think about as well, because I just hadn't even seen that. All of the ACCS schedules that I'd kind of looked at, they all get into that avenue of switching between classes. Where will classes be held? This is something that we're still working on. That's also somewhat going to be determined by how many students we have to begin with. If we've only got 9, it might be for a little while we meet in a home of some kind and then develop as we get more students. If we have 50 students to start, that's not really going to be an option. So that's still to be determined, but I'm going to be reaching out to local churches because there's a lot of church buildings around. They're all up to code. They're all, we don't have to have them inspected, all this stuff. They're their own building, and a lot of church buildings aren't being used 5 days a week. So it might be something where we find a church to partner with. And we also don't know where Coram Deo Bible Church will be in a year. If we have our own building, that might answer that question for us. But that is something we're still kind of figuring out. But that's kind of, the avenue that we're looking at. Potentially churches. If we're small enough to start, it might be a little bit more homegrown. What will school hours be? We want to provide a five-day full-time thing, but we might make accommodations for, hey, Monday is not a heavy day. Monday is, we want your Sundays to be Sunday. We want it to be the Sabbath. Spend time with family. Don't worry about homework, because that's another thing that we learned from Grace. Grace doesn't do homework for their students until 7th grade because the way he expressed it, if we have your students for 8 hours a day in person, 4 days a week for them, why do we need to send them with homework? Which
I feel like we should be able to accomplish what we need to accomplish
Yes.
in that amount of time,
Yeah.
which is true.
Yes, and I don't think the 7th through 12th grade homework is like, it's pretty minimal. It's writing. It's not like, oh, I've got this giant stack of homework to be done. But regardless, we want Monday to be a lighter day because we want Sunday to be able to be Sunday for the families that come. But we still want it to be full-time in person. Is there a place for special needs students? We want to try to accommodate that as much as possible. That might be more challenging to begin. I know what a lot of ACCS in-person schools do is support from a parent if they can, and trying to accommodate special needs students as much as possible without entirely shifting the nature of the class. So it might mean, I think I heard Doug use the example, a deaf student, the parent comes in and signs for them, or that was the main example he used. But it might mean accommodating in that way. I know there are classical things being developed for special needs students. I haven't looked into that much yet. But so the general answer to that is we would like to try to accommodate that. That would probably be on a individualized basis. We would have to assess what that looks like for that specific student and if we can work with that. And that's probably going to be more effectively handled as the school grows and as we get more established. Regarding theology, soteriology, eschatology, ecclesiology, general principle is reformed. We want to be as reformed to the word as possible in all that we do. There's specifically in terms of eschatology, there's different philosophies within Coram Deo Bible Church. I can only speak for myself. I'm personally post-millennial, but I have no problem with people. Yeah, Rob is looking shocked at me. But
Where did that come from?
we would likely want to teach the multiple viewpoints of it without, I don't know, but personally optimistic, I guess, but reformed generally in principle. So those are the main questions.
It would generally follow the doctrinal statement of our church.
Generally speaking, yes. That is what I submitted to ACCS for general statement of faith of what we would largely affirm. I think it was as general as possible, but basics. So those are the general questions that we had kind of come up with beforehand. Are there any pressing questions that you guys have that come to mind? No?
A couple out of curiosity.
Yeah.
Would you take in like part-time students like to come to certain classes but not all classes?
That's something Marco and I had talked about. We would like to accommodate that. We really want this to be something that can unify us in a lot of ways. So I'm not sure. We would like that idea. The only potential hesitation I think he and I had talked about was creating division between students that only come for certain days and students that are coming for all the days. It might not be as big of a problem in practice as it might be theoretically, but we're not opposed to that idea, no.
And then another one, just out of, because I have 3 kids who go
Sure.
3 different ways, does the classical method of teaching like integrate all learning styles and types? Like audio visual versus tactile?
Yes. Yeah, there's, it's not rigid in terms of one learning style. I think also because of smaller class sizes and just the general nature of classical, it can be more individualized and you can really pour into a specific student in the way that they need. I was listening to something I talked about with Chris Odudu, some of you guys might know. He is someone that we're definitely looking at as trying to get to be a teacher at some point, especially for our older grades, especially for boys. Older boys need male teachers. So that's something we're going to be striving for as well. But I was talking to Chris about making sure we're also educating boys to be men and girls to be women, not everyone is one thing, and understanding the differences between the two. And I think classical really allows for that and supports that, as opposed to flattening everybody into this kind of generic non-gendered thing, which is just the secular mindset. But yes, it does integrate all of those.
There's an emphasis in classical model of not only do you know how to do something, but you've got to be able to tell it, and teach it, and present it, and then get creative with it. So there's a kind of an emphasis on hands-on, so there's your tactile.
Yeah.
You know, and of course a lot of singing and you're learning timelines and stuff. So you're going to hit all those learning styles. You're not just going to sit and write.
Yeah.
I'm just thinking from like, a mom perspective that I have 3 kids that learn 3 different ways. And so,
I had
what
4.
works for
Yeah,
one
so I
doesn't work
gotcha.
for another.
Yeah, for sure. And one thing, kind of like you're talking about the student participation in what's going on. When we were at Grace, I know I keep referencing Grace, but it was a very clear example of what this can be. We went into an 11th grade class and they were going through a book of fallacies, and the students were leading the class and leading the discussion. The teacher was sitting off to the side just observing and directing, but it was more intelligent discussion amongst 11th graders than I heard in all 4 years of my college. And then he asked, what have you guys liked about this year? What have you learned from this year? And these students started talking about how I love to be able to articulate an idea that I have and argue it intelligently and disagree with somebody in a way that's constructive. I saw at the 12th grade level, they have their students read Communist Manifesto and refute it. Like, that's the level of stuff that we're hoping to achieve, is like she said in the video, it's not just reading Christian books the whole time. It's reading so much. The high quality stuff and stuff that is challenging.
Did any of us read Communist Manifesto? Anybody in here? I'm just curious.
I think I did.
Yeah.
But
The classically educated.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I hadn't, so.
Right. So,
I think there too, when you look at like the difference between classical model and the you got your time slots, like math is 50 minutes,
Mhm.
science is 50 minutes, and they can't interact with each other. You don't ever talk about math in science class or whatever, or literature in math class or whatever. That is made so that you only get to a certain level of learning. That was created he was talking about being a slave.
Yeah.
That was to create slaves for industry.
Yeah.
They can think enough to do the skills and do the tasks, but they can't think deep enough to actually have learned anything
Mhm.
or to think critically. And so with the classical model, you're interacting all of the subjects, and think of like all the subjects are here, and God divided and His word
Yes.
is in them, so you bring everything. So sometimes in math class, you're going to be talking about literature for some
Yeah.
reason.
Yep.
And that's kind of a different mindset.
Everything spills into each other.
School educated, that's a whole different thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
You can tell us briefly your history with classical education.
Okay, I was Catholic school educated and then public school educated, became a public school teacher, and then started to homeschool all 400 kids. And I didn't know about the classical model when I first started, but boy, now if I had to do it again, there would be no question, it would be classical model, and I would start with a classical program. My oldest two daughters went in at the resort level in high school, and then the other two started like third, fourth grade, because that's when we started grammar and Latin.
Yeah.
And so they were involved in the program, and then I became a support manager. So I actually started the classical conversations programs in Southwest Missouri. And we did a lot of like parent training, tutor training. How do you teach math classically? So those kind of things. So if anybody, I want to be a resource.
Yeah.
If anybody has questions or needs help or needs resources or just wants to know. I have seen, not trying to brag, but I have seen the differences in kids that are public school educated and kids that have been taught to think and have a worldview.
Yeah.
No, just like you were talking about. We studied evolution for a good semester and creationism for a semester. So when they go out in the world, they know what to say.
Yeah.
They know what to believe about evolution because they've already studied it. And some Christian schools want to just say, okay, we're not going to talk about those things. We're not going to talk about these things that are controversial. We're just going to stick to creation. And then they go out in the world and they lose it because they don't know how to fight it. It's
Exactly.
their own minds. Not that I'm promoting people go out and fight about it, but you know what I mean? But like we teach them to debate and we teach them how to think and how to keep their faith because worldview is so.
Mm-hmm.
And I know, I don't know what else. I was support manager and we put on like a parent seminars, three-day seminars in the summer for parents, and we brought in speakers and we had classes for the dads and classes for the kids, and so I love this method. I absolutely love it. I don't think there should be anything else going on. And,
Yeah. Well, it was what was done for.
It was hard.
Yeah. It was what was done for hundreds of years, if not longer, and then.
It causes, like,
Yeah.
as a parent, you're going to have to be a lifelong learner. You
Yeah.
have to change your mind. You're not done. Like I was saying, if you can't teach math, how good was your education? Like, why can't you teach math?
Mm-hmm.
I used to say, oh, I can't do that. Well, you just graduated from a school system that should have taught you
Yeah.
how to teach math. Because if you didn't get to that level, you didn't get a good education. And for me, it was a lot of hard work for me too, because they were surpassing my knowledge
Very rapidly. Yeah.
But to this lifelong learner thing, and always having like parent training and stuff is really, really good. For
Yeah.
parents.
And-
the confidence that they need.
And I know ACCS also has a ton of resources for parents, for teachers. So there's conferences all the time. There's seminars all the time that are available on their website. There's a lot of resources for those of us that haven't had a classical education but are wanting to give it to our children. There's a lot of resources to educate ourselves. And in starting this, it's going to take sacrifice and effort from everybody involved in starting it. It's not just going to be, the school started, there go my kids, great, it's done now. There will be more parent involvement than some will be used to. But that's a good thing. We want parent involvement in everything that we do.
Well, I'm always worried about what the public school system is producing. I deal with a lot of kids.
Uh-huh.
Different ages, and I'm horrified at the way they cannot think and they cannot write and all. So I always get kind of frustrated. I say, where's the church? Where's the church? The church ought to be thinking. And I'm so, I don't know, proud is the word, excited that, wow, like you guys are taking this seriously. You are providing something that, an alternative, not just complaining.
Yeah.
Not just wishing, but actually doing something about providing this opportunity for kids.
Well, that's what we felt. We watched the other part of that documentary, and at that time, Steph and I were thinking about where we want to send our kids, and we were like, okay, maybe we'll homeschool them till 6th grade, and then maybe they'll send them to Grace in Springfield. That will be a sacrifice and drive. And then we watched the first episode of this documentary, and we were like, okay, I guess we need to start one here, because that's what we really should do. It's something that's important, and
It's awesome.
yeah. So, yeah, all that being said, any other questions that you guys have? You guys might just be all on board and not have questions, and that's totally fine. Again, we're going to do more nights like this for people that are not central to the thing that we're doing, that are more on the outside. Of a parent that sends their kids to College Heights that hears about it and goes, I'm not thrilled with what College Heights is right now. Let me take my kids over here. From what I understand, College Heights has kind of become a dumping ground for problem kids from public school.
Let me be a little bit vulnerable with this. When I went to I did put my youngest son in school.
Yeah.
After being classical conversations, because his dad's gone a lot, he worked a lot, and I wanted him to have some male role models, and I just felt like the teenage boy at home with his mom, I was just at the point where I couldn't keep him
Yeah.
challenged and everything. So I looked at College Heights and I looked at Thomas Jefferson, and I chose Thomas Jefferson even though it's secular, because I wanted him to learn how to think and be exposed to these things before he goes to college.
Mhm.
And they're not like anti or Christian.
Right.
There's a lot of different philosophies going on there, a lot of different religions and stuff. But I didn't choose College Heights because I had the same feeling about it that I think. And I don't want to dog College Heights.
Sure.
Yeah. But I would much rather them have that in classical comedy, or Thomas Jefferson is more of a liberal arts.
Yeah.
Classical model anyway.
Yeah.
So he went right into Latin. He went right into playing his violin. He went and all the things that he had done in the classical model. He got there.
Yeah.
But yeah, I chose that over.
Yeah.
You're just taking the public school and saying.
Yes. And I think it wasn't like that when I was in high school, and so much has changed. So I've been working in Young Life, which is a ministry outreach thing in the public schools around here, and I walked in and I was like, oh my gosh, it's so much worse than it was when I was in high school. More than I could have imagined what has happened to public education over. I mean, the foundation of it was corrupted from the beginning, but a lot of us didn't know that until it's become apparent. 40% of kids graduating from public school can't read, and that's outrageous. And they still graduate them. I have friends in the public school system that are teachers, and they just push the kids through. There's no holding back. They just push kids through. They don't actually make them learn, because it's we gotta get them out because it's governmental. Yeah. So all of that to say, I'll kind of try and wrap us up here because I don't want to keep you guys any longer than I need to. But moving forward, just be praying about it. If there's ways that you feel like and Kelly, you've expressed that you want to be a resource, and I know Caitlin Western has said the same thing. Like, she wants to be a resource. Like, if there is something where you're feeling led, like this is something I want to be a part of in some capacity, absolutely talk to me. Again, we're in very early stages. we want to try and get this by the fall of 24. I'm not holding on to that date with a firm death grip, but it's what I want to strive for. If we can make that happen, fantastic. If not, okay. And again, like I said, if we only have 9 students, great. I'm not going to show that last part because it's already 7:30. I don't want to keep you guys any longer, but look up Geronimo Amen on YouTube, part 1, Geronimo Amen. It gives a history of ACCS and so many testimonies of people starting schools that start with 8, start with 9, start with 15, and now have 250. They started in a house, now they have this awesome building that they're in. The story of Grace in Springfield, how they got their building, is incredible. Like, ask me at some point and I can tell you that story. It's wild. But they were renting from a church. It tried to sell the building out from under them. They ended up buying it from the church and renting it back to them. So,
Paying less per month.
and paying less per month than they were paying in rent. So, I don't know what it looks like. One thing I will try to organize as we get closer into next school year is visitations for parents that are interested in sending their kids to Grace in Springfield so they can see what it might be in 20 years. I'm obviously not saying, hey, we're going to open next year and this is exactly what it's going to look like, because they've been there for 20 years. They've got a 14-acre property. We're not going to be there right away unless the Lord just drops it on us. But so just be praying about it. Telling people that you know might be interested,
Tell people that might not be.
and tell people that might not be interested. I'm going to have a poster made up, other than the one that we had with tonight's info. I'm just going to have a general poster made that we can put in places, so if people are interested, they can be reaching out. Going to try and get in contact with some local churches about possible places, and just letting them know it's coming, and it's something different. Yeah.
I'll talk to you about that later too.
Okay.
From a place that-
Oh, okay.
It was an old church that we bought, so
Okay. Perfect.
we could talk about it.
Okay, perfect. That sounds amazing. Any other questions that you guys have before we?
What about teachers? Are you hiring
So,
certified teachers?
so what we would likely have to do at the start is largely volunteer. I know, again, I'm going off of the meeting we had with Grace. They had 1 year where they had volunteer teachers, and then after that first year, they were able to start paying. And I'm not overly concerned right away with certifying those teachers, but the teachers that we do have, we will be pretty thorough in training them, just like I'm trying to train myself in this whole methodology. I know, Jaden, you and I have talked about potentially doing something. That would be something where, like, hey, Jaden wants to come in. We're going to give her all the resources that she needs, all the training that she needs. So if there is certification that she needs to get, she can get it. Or there is education, I know at New St. Andrews, for people in the position of headmaster or administrator or educator for specifically teaching classical education. So that might be something that we pursue as well. And then as we accumulate more funds, if we do fundraising, we would want to hire and pay our teachers as much as we can. And that doesn't always look like a lot comparatively to public school. I know Grace said they pay their teachers, their full-time teachers, I think between 22 and 30, somewhere in there a year, which isn't a lot, but the other thing that classical provides beyond just compensation is a level of respect from your students that you would not get in public school, actually being able to teach them stuff that matters, and yes, and students' involvement in what you do, parents' involvement in what you do. You're not fighting constantly against you're not fighting administration and parents and kids and
Having to teach things you do not want to teach.
that as well. You are not ever having to compromise your Christian faith in what you're teaching. So, any other things before I let you guys go? Any other questions you guys have, feel free to reach out to me, pull me aside at church or whenever. We can talk about it. And we'll keep you guys updated with more stuff that we do. If we have another vision night where we're getting into some more details about, hey, this is what this specific program will look like. This is what the discipline system looks like. We've got a lot of documents that Grace gave us, and they were like, use them. If you want to just copy and paste and use this, great. And so we've got their board of directors information. We've got a giant thing of what they have, their bylaws, all of that stuff. So I'm working through all that. We will likely, as a steering committee, form that stuff more concretely as we go forward over the next year. So if there's no other questions, thank you guys for coming. I'll end us in prayer, and then you guys can mingle or skedaddle, whatever you want to do. Dear Lord, thank you so much for this evening. Thank you for those that have come here to learn more about this. Lord, I just pray that everything we do, as I said at the beginning, everything we do in this, we lift up to you. You are in control of every aspect of this. We don't want it to be ours. We want it to be yours. So we just pray that if you are in this, that you guide our path, and that if this is your will, that you bless it, and we just be faithful to that. In Jesus' name, amen.